This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
BFM 89.9, the business station. Good morning, I am Rich Bradbury, and welcome to The Workplace. This is that show where we tap into insights to empower your people and to help elevate your organization. Now, workplace well-being is one of those things every company says that they care about. But what's really happening behind the scenes, especially for women at work? Now, earlier this year, we spoke about the 2025 Malaysia Wellbeing at Work report, and the findings were already worrying. And today, we're taking a closer look at what the data tells us about women's experiences in the workplace. And honestly, the picture isn't really any better. Women are reporting higher stress, lower satisfaction, and feeling less safe to speak up at work. It's raising some tough questions about how we build workplaces, how we lead people, and whether all those well-being efforts companies are talking about are actually working. And joining us for this conversation is Nurlida Azmi, Chapter Lead for People Community for the Wellbeing at Work movement and founder of Chapter Advisory, together with Shazli Ghani, Human Resources Director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore, to talk about what's working, what's not, and what needs to change. And in the meantime, if you have any thoughts or questions you'd like to ask our guest today, you can get us on our U-Mobile WhatsApp number. It is 018-789-8899, or reach out to us on X. We are at BFM Radio. Ollie, Shazli, welcome to the show. How are you both today?
Very good. Thank you, Richard.
Very good. Thank you, Richard.
Well, thank you for coming in. Now, as I mentioned just then, back in March, we discussed the 2025 Malaysia Wellbeing at Work report with Hetal Doshi, of course, CEO of O-Psych, alongside Dr. Kenneth Kafagi. He's the Professor of HR Management at Sunway University. And that report pointed to a continued decline in workplace well-being, especially for women. Now, with the release of the Malaysia Women Wellbeing at Work report, what would you say are the most urgent or eye-opening findings that leaders simply can't afford to be ignoring?
I think, Richard, one of the things that you had already put up in the context was it's a very troubling environment. And therefore, when you look at the reports and you contextualize it and take it to the women's level, you see that the women's score have gone down. So it's gone down by about 3 percentage points when compared to women as well. Then it's also 3 percentage points as compared to 2023. So the trend is worrying. But I think we need to look beyond numbers. And I think, as you know, the Wellbeing Index comes from 3 perspectives. So we have the psychosocial risk. Risk, you always want it to go down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it went up. And it went up in 16 out of the 20 parameters. So you begin to question why and what were the top 3 and what was the increase. And it's quite significant. For example, in terms of meaning of work. And you know the current generation and the women force, they look for the meaning. And it had declined as much as 14%. And additionally, looking for it was, how do they develop? That had gone down 9%, along with vertical trust. Do you trust your bosses? Do you trust the people that can make the decision? That was one dimension. The other dimensions, the other 2 is psychosocial well-being and psychosocial safety. You want that to go up. Unfortunately, it also went down. So the first one of psychosocial well-being dropped to 59%. So you can say, yeah, it dropped not that big, but still it's on a worsening trend. And the parameters that it talks about are parameters that are very important these days. It's about social acceptance. It talks about the autonomy and positive relationships. Those are key parameters as the community becomes important. And the next one is psychological safety. Unfortunately, it also went down by 2%, with women feeling a little bit less valued and where can they take risk? And with all these factors, the overall well-being index for women actually, unfortunately, took a dip. And that causes a concern for us.
I would say so. I mean, there's worrying, genuinely worrying numbers. And it almost makes you question whether or not the hard work that's gone into the well-being at work in all of these workplaces that we're discussing has actually been in vain. What is the issue here? Do we know?
I think there are many issues that as we go along and unpack. And if you will allow me, if you then look at the total workforce, there is always the mantra today that you want to build an inclusive workforce.
Right.
And you talk the dimensions of gender, generations, and many other things. But today we focus on gender, right? And even if you do and look at it from the national perspective, so it's still all downward trend. And if you can say some of them are only 1%, but 1% is a lot of women, and you can never build the inclusivity. And if you look at it, is that the well-being index generally dropped by 3% to 62. But yet for women, it dropped even more. So the weight of the change is really coming from the women workforce as well, if we cut about it. And if I look again back from the 3 parameters that we addressed earlier, Richard, if you allow me, is the psychosocial risk is, are the women feeling undervalued?
Right.
You can include them and you can have statistics, I have 50% of women, but they still feel undervalued. Their voices are not heard. Are they supported by the leadership? And additionally, what is the future growth for them? So career development and opportunity becomes very important. And the other thing in terms of well-being, psychosocial well-being, is you're called to the table. They always say, get the women to the table. But do you hear their voices?
Right.
Do you include them in decision making?
Yeah.
And all those are causing a problem, as well as psychosocial safety is like psychological safety is. We have a lot of speak up. How many of the women dare to speak up? And I think, Richard, when you look at this, at the women's index, both from male versus female, but also against national averages, there's something for us to reflect. How do we make it? How do we move the needle a bit more with impact?
Shazli, what's your thought on this?
Well, thanks, Richard. I mean, I think Oli painted a very good picture of, what the current state is and where some of the challenges are as well. And I think, the numbers show that generally at the workplace that women have a more difficult time, I would say. Probably they feel less supported. And there are other factors impacting it as well. There are a lot of studies that show generally women also have less self-esteem. They are, typically more critical of themselves. And therefore, it's, as organizations like us, it's important to see how do we create kind of the infrastructure, the culture, and, the kind of that safe environment to really help or, empower them a little bit more to kind of break through these barriers. And I think one of the things that we look at, if, I go back to the report as well, and Oli quite rightly pointed out, while yes, we look at the report on gender, but, I think looking at it on a more holistic basis, across all demographics, how do we really, what's the key thing that we take away from the report? And while I was seeing that everybody has suffered a bit more in terms of psychosocial risk, what was also alarming for me is that the men are catching up.
Right.
And I see that, they had a bigger increase in risk, even though both men and women had an increase in risk. So, while we continue to look at empowering women, we must also make sure that, we create something that addresses everyone in the organization. But yes, so, I would say that's the key insight for me.
Ollie, just to reiterate, can we look at how the latest findings about women compare to the overall national trends that you shared earlier last month?
Yes, in terms of the national trends, when you look at it, it's like it's very challenging. If we look at it again, let's go into the overall. So the index dropped by 3% to 62%, but women are now scoring even lower at 60%. And these are big numbers already at the top level. And then we go to the dimensions that make up the index, right? So we look at the psychosocial risk. The risk level has increased by 6%. For the women, it increased by 5%. So you say, where's the other 1%? The 1% is being carried by the other demographics, but the women are accounting for the larger part of the risk, and that comes from the statistics. And again, it's coming back to all the factors are not showing. Even those that are showing improvements is too marginal. When 13 of the 20s are showing a decrease, that becomes very challenging. Like we talked about the meaning of work. That has become so important. And if you dissect it from the youth perspective, that's like almost number one. So are they going to find it? And it was 14% drop is very big for women. And then the vertical trust. as leadership models change, right, is no longer hierarchical. Who is a leader when you talk about vertical trust? And I think people need to understand that it's not just your boss, it's who are the influencers, who shapes your career in the organization. And workplace these days is also made complicated. Is it just 9 to 5? When you talk about workplace, is it actually work being done versus workplace? So I think we need to be very sensitized to that. And the other thing is about the psychosocial risk, about feeling included and empowered. As you look at the different generations, and if you cut by women, you will see that they also want to be heard. They want to be empowered. So when it declined by 1% to 59%, it is still a very low number. So when you compare it with the national average, it's still not high enough. And then for the last one, which is the psychological safety that you asked about, for women, it dropped to 63%, slightly below the national average. But psychological safety is so important that any drop takes away the confidence of you to be able to do some of the new things that the organization are asking, to be experimental. You always hear about that.
Want to do.
But, it's like you don't feel safe. And safe is not just about saying and fearing retributions, but safe is also, I got an idea. How far do I push it, And I think that will accrue confidence in the workforce as well as results for the organization.
Let's look at that. And so the data shows that women are facing higher psychosocial risks, as you mentioned, burnout, poor self-rated health, lower satisfaction. What do they really say, though, about the day-to-day experience of working women in Malaysia?
I think it's saying that are they doing the right job? I think the root of the issues is as jobs get redimensioned, do they first face burnout? Is the allocation is matching to their capability? So I think burnout comes from many aspects. It's not just the current work. Many jobs are being redimensioned today, and some jobs are falling more on women. And I think it's also their responsibility in the society that says that you're juggling other things as well. So it's just not work. So I think that's where it comes about, Richard, is that you need to balance when you talk about a woman's duty. Where is it coming from? Because workplace is one, and the surrounding responsibility that comes together. And as some of our companies still allow works from home or hybrid, can they really work at home when somebody is screaming for attention? Who goes to attend to their needs then? I think that's where the women are feeling very challenged. Can they also speak up and say, I need more help. I need my job redimension. I think there's some journey to be made in there.
If I can add to that, I fully echo what Ollie says. And if you look at it structurally, policy-wise, even from a legislative perspective, women carry a lot more burden at home, and that if I'm being so bold, I would say that that's also kind of the expectation. If I take a very simple example, if I look at the maternity leave and paternity leave that we have today, it's 98 days for women. Up until last year, it was 3 days for men. It's now 7, but you can see that there is that inherently means there is still a lot of expectations on the women to carry more of that burden, especially at home. Then you have a lot more to juggle at the workplace as well. And then when you're at work, are you then feeling that psychological safety? Do you feel empowered enough? I share this story because it was a super powerful insight for me. And I had one of my team members who she came to me one day and she was looking really troubled, really dejected. And I said, look, what's wrong? I pulled her into a room and I said, you look like you've just lost your job or, kind of going through a tough time. And she said, Shazali, I just kind of feel like it. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I'm pregnant. I said, whoa, let's take a step back. First of all, huge congratulations. This should not make you feel any less safe or that it's going to impact your career in any way. And she is one of my best performers in the team. So I said, look, trust in me, trust in the system. We talk a lot about psychological safety here at L'Oreal. So, by all means, take your maternity leave. And she came back and I promoted her. But, the key insight into that was how difficult it was for a conversation in the first place. And what did they think, what was the implication they thought would be on them just by being pregnant. So there is a lot of inherent, I would say, insecurity and a lot more, difficulty in terms of balancing work and responsibilities at home as well. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Oli.
I think that's a really interesting insight as well. I think there's an element, it must take guts to come out and have that conversation as well. And I think potentially they are feeling and I don't want to speak for all women, obviously, but an element of almost guilt and shame to be able to say something like that, because it seems so ingrained in the culture that if you are pregnant, then you're causing problems for your company, you're causing issues for the company. And this is not just a Malaysia-centric thing. This is a worldwide issue. But we're in 2025 now, and you would think that this kind of conversation would have shifted somewhat by now, and yet we are still having these same conversations right now. Let's take a short break. I have more questions for you both when we come back after these messages, though.
Sure.
Folks, you are listening to The Workplace. It's your essential guide to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of people management, to empower your people and to elevate your organizations. We're discussing workplace well-being for women in Malaysia and speaking with Oli. She is the chapter lead for People Community for the Wellbeing at Work movement and founder of Chapter Advisory. And Shazli Ghani, the HR director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore. We explore what the latest Malaysia Women Wellbeing at Work report tells us about women's experiences at work, why stress levels are rising, and why many still feel unsafe to speak up, and what leaders can do to build workplaces where women can truly thrive. I'm Rich Bradbury. We'll be back after a few messages. Do keep it here on BFM 89.9, the business station.
Backing feminist movements. BFM 89.9. The business station.
BFM 89.9, the business station. Welcome back to The Workplace, your essential guide to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of people management to empower your people and to elevate your organization. I am Rich Bradbury. We're discussing workplace well-being for women in Malaysia with Nurlida Azmi, Oli, the chapter lead for People Community for Wellbeing at Works movement and founder of Chapter Advisory. And Shazli Ghani, he is the HR director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore. We're exploring what the latest Malaysia Women Wellbeing at Work report tells us about women's experiences at work, why stress levels are rising, why many still feel unsafe to speak up, and what leaders can do to build workplaces where women can truly thrive. Shazli, I want to come over to you. Now, L'Oreal has been arguably ahead of the curve by incorporating psychological safety into your engagement surveys since 2021.
Yes.
I believe, yes. 2023. How has that decision helped to shape your policies and help you better understand and respond to gender-specific experiences in the workplace?
Thanks, Richard. So it was earlier than 2023, and I would say it's had a tremendous impact because while we don't dive too deep into the gender segregation, but what it has done is it has really helped shape the change in culture that was necessary. What do I mean by that? A few years ago, we launched an initiative called Simplicity, which we joke about because it's actually not related to simplicity. It's related to behavior change, cultural change, leadership, etc. And it really had a profound impact on the rest of the organization, so much so that we recently launched Simplicity 2. And one of the 10 pillars that we have is psychological safety is the cradle of creativity. Right, creativity for us is immensely important. In a beauty company and a leading beauty company. But in order to get to that, we realized that the key ingredient is having that psychological safety. The ability to test and learn, the ability to learn from your mistakes, come up with new things, and then we further defined it by how do we apply this across the different demographics we have in the organization, because I would say L'Oreal is a little bit of, the opposite in terms of other organizations. We are 71% in terms of women in Malaysia and Singapore. And one of the things that we looked at was even though we might be in some countries, maybe we might be more women in the workplace, but is that also translating into the kind of leadership positions that we see? And globally, when we looked at this, we said, yes, there was an area that we had to work on, because we looked at the numbers back in 2007. Out of the top 300 leadership positions globally, only 27% were occupied by women. Now, if I fast forward that to 2024, out of those same leadership positions, we are now at 54%. So, it's really, I would say the initiatives have had a lot of impact in terms of driving it. You maybe don't see it day to day, but when you look at it over time and the impact that it has created, it has really been, I would say, a topic of culture change, creating the psychological safety, and structurally allowing that balance, right? So, Ollie said that same point earlier in terms of, yes, you might have the platforms to speak up. Are people really using it? Do they feel safe enough that, their anonymity is protected? And we've gone through great lengths to ensure that right, for all our employees as well. We even do something called Global Ethics Day, where, our platform is called Speak Up, and anybody can raise any ethical issues regarding violence at the workplace, inappropriate behavior, sexual harassment, etc. And every year, the global CEO dedicates one day to answering these questions live. We have, of course, a continuous Speak Up platform where anybody can raise anything, and we continue to guarantee confidentiality. But until someone dedicates that amount of time and resources to say that we are really serious about this topic, it's going to be difficult to really see any kind of culture change. So, that's one of the few things that we have done.
Let me just ask you, so the number originally was 27%, was that
Yes.
right? And then you went to 54%, so effectively doubling the amount of women in leadership within L'Oreal.
That's right.
What was the immediate impact then of that change?
Sorry, when you say immediate impact, meaning?
What was the... Okay, so you've gone from 27% to 54%. How did that change the culture within L'Oreal?
Right. I think, so again, very profound impact, because I think, at the, if I talk about the lower levels, just to be a bit blunt, I think it had a lot of, increase in morale, encouragement. You see, women being more, how shall I say, feeling a lot more empowered to take their careers forward, a lot more brave, a lot more courageous. And when they see senior leaders in the organization having reached that level of success, that creates a great role model for them to aspire for something. And, what I would say one of the other indirect, impacts it has had is that, it kind of breaks away that psyche of, okay, is there a glass ceiling? Yes, we talk about diversity, but is that really true? And now when they see that, look, the kind of journey that we've taken and how, successful it's been, that really reinforces the kind of, mentality they have about how far they can truly go at the workplace.
Right. Because the reason I asked you that is because it leads on to my next question. Is like, many companies kind of talk about women in leadership, and it becomes a checkbox rather. That being said, the same thing is for well-being as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of people and a lot of companies still treat well-being as a checkbox, offering things like wellness apps and flexible work hours, maybe a workshop kind of thrown in here and there. But the data shows that these aren't really moving that needle that we've discussed. Are we missing the mark on what really drives what drives meaningful well-being at work?
I think we are, Richard, in a sense that all those things that companies are doing in terms of the physical well-being, employee-assisted program, I think those remain important. But it's no longer addressing the systemic issues at the core of it. What's driving burnout? I think it really comes to be about the work itself and the confidence for women. And I like the story that Shazli shared just now about the growth. And we talked earlier about the psychosocial risk of possibilities of development. If women don't see that, I can actually go forward, and what we're going for is the word possibility. You build hope and you drive motivation. So when I think it's still important to have that nursing room, to have flexible hours. But I think you should actually look at the job content and how are you doing development. And also like organizations, and I've been with the Global Bank, where when you're doing a recruitment, unless the slate of candidates have a certain percentage of diversity in gender, the role cannot move forward. That is really acting. You just don't make a policy. A policy is not enough. It's easy to craft policies, called JetGPT. They give you benchmarking and you get it through the board, you get it approved. But how are you going to measure it? So the idea was that you begin it from the employee life cycle at recruitment, and then you bring it into the pipeline of leaders. I've been in an organization where the role was like, oh, it's engineers. Are they going to go into the trenches? You know what? They do go to trenches. You just got to provide the opportunities. So you've got to track how much of the feeders that you're putting into the role are also diverse. And then afterwards, how many of them move upwards? The other thing that I think we must also feel about undervalued is there really a wage disparity? And some will say, no, there's none. And some, maybe there's none, right? But however, in the global bank that I was with, they did a wage discrepancy. I had a male partner who was my employee resource group partner. And he says, Ollie, I want to remove any gaps. Same job, same pay. And I think that takes courage. It helps a little bit when some of these things are done by the gentleman, because it's not just about gender. It's really, I want to bring the best people to the job. So I think the representation has to be across the employee life cycle, in terms of recruitment, in terms of development, in terms of retention. I think tick boxing comes when you say, I've put ping pong tables, I've put maternity rooms, I've given you flexi. And the real question also is paternity leave really going to help move the needle? Should it? Because there are societal pressures. So the education about responsibilities has to be into the community itself, because I think the Wellbeing at Work Index was very good. It tells you what is the individual's responsibility, what is the organization's responsibility, what is the community's responsibility. And I think that's where, when we put targeted actions and we have the ecosystem working together, I think that is going to be much more sustainable.
Hold that thought. We do need to take one more short break. Folks, you are listening to The Workplace. It is your essential guide to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of people management, to empower your people and to elevate your organization. Today, we are discussing workplace well-being for women in Malaysia with Nolida Azmi, Chapter Lead for People Community for the Wellbeing at Work movement and founder of Chapter Advisory, and Shazli Ghani, HR Director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore. We're exploring what the latest Malaysia Women Wellbeing at Work report tells us about women's experiences at work, why stress levels are rising, why many still feel unsafe to speak up, and what leaders can do to build workplaces where women can truly thrive. We'll be right back after a few messages. Do keep it here on BFM 89.9, the business station.
Bias-free media. BFM 89.9, the business station.
BFM 89.9, the business station. You are listening to The Workplace. It's your essential guide to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of people management, to empower your people and to elevate your organization. We're discussing workplace well-being for women in Malaysia with Nolida Azmi, Ollie, Chapter Lead for People Community for the Wellbeing at Work movement and founder of Chapter Advisory, and Shazli Ghani, he's the HR Director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore. I want to come back to you, Ollie, just before I get over to Shazli in a moment. You talk about the dangers of performative gestures. And from what this latest report shows, how can organizations move beyond, as you've discussed, token DEI efforts and actually build equitable, gender-conscious cultures?
I hate to use this, but I do think you have to put some measurement, not measurement that are punitive, but measurements that are rewarding. For example, the manager that had said that I will remove all gender pay gap. I think let's reward the person rather than punish. What I feel works well is role modeling.
Right.
So you say this organization, this department has done this. Look at the availability of their workforce. Look at the productivity. Look at how their talent shortage has been addressed. So I think we're all not working just for love and sunshine, Richard. I think in an organization, you need to see what is the value derived. So I think we should be realistic, because I think when you do policies and you don't enact them, you actually do a discredit to management.
I agree.
Even if you do 3 policies, measure them, share the impact. Then you do the next wave. I do think that leaders have to have credibility. I don't think you should shortchange. Still have the flexible hours if you can. I think, Richard, the other one I want to talk about is there could be very differences between big global companies, regional companies, and the smaller SMEs. I think along the way, there should be knowledge sharing and perhaps an ideation. How can we take others who may think that it's expensive to actually do these inclusive measures? But actually, I feel that if you can show the value, they may be persuaded. And maybe there could be like a big sister or a big brother helping them along this journey.
Now, Shazli, I want to move over to you now. and look at things from an HR lens,
Sure.
How do you balance then pushing for things like deep systemic change while also addressing this immediate everyday well-beings of employees, especially women?
So I think it comes back to a very important point Ollie mentioned earlier, which is that if you're not tracking it, if you're not measuring it, it's not going to move, right? And we very firmly believe that as well for, the kind of policies that we're implementing. And it's just, I've been to enough HR conferences and forums and seen Ollie, in these where, yes, okay, the speakers talk a great deal about psychological safety, making sure that, yes, women empowered, but then very little else in terms of, actions and what are you actually doing with that? For us, I mean, again, I give an example at what we did in L'Oreal, and several years ago, we implemented something called the Global Leadership Survey. Now, every country, every director in the country now has I would say 12-point dimension score. One of them is how much are you creating a psychologically safe environment for your team? How much are you empowering? And how much are you actively listening? That forms a part of our bonus. If we are talking about getting serious about it,
that's getting
measure
serious.
it, and now there should be some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're never going to get people interested or really invested in the topic.
Is that global across L'Oreal?
Globally, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I of course heard stories at the beginning. People were like, "Oh, but isn't this a little bit too, too close to home, etc." But we said, no. Look, if we are going to be serious about it, we should show that we are going to do that. And every year now, of course, we people like myself, like I said, the directors, we then get measured on it, and we discuss it very actively in our year-end review conversations as well. So it's a top topic. I'm even saying that why stop at that level, right? You should go down to even my direct reports because these are the senior managers in the organization. These are people who are going to take over from us in one day, but they're the ones who have the biggest impact on the rest of the workforce. And if they are not also translating that same behaviors that we are supposed to lead, then when are they going to start doing that same thing? So yes, so we take it very seriously.
That is pretty serious. That's not just talking. That's actually walking. That this is something that we are lacking across the board. Now, the report does show though that offensive behaviours remain unchanged at 13%, and women continue to report slightly higher exposure. Why do you think this number is so stubborn? Why is it not shifting? And what more needs to be done, both culturally and structurally, to address it?
I think women are very, very hesitant to bring up any kind of sexual harassment, verbal or even physical violence, because I think they feel that the blame will be shifted on them. Were they provoking it, in the sexual harassment? And I think there are legendary stories about in the organizations that when the offensive behaviors are reported, either nothing is done or worse, actually it's the women that becomes the victim. So I think the numbers, while it's so alarming, I believe, Richard, it's even worse because there is perhaps a habit in the organization to normalize offensive language. We all laugh at our politeness. We shouldn't laugh. And it takes a very, and I think we go back to what Shazli is talking about, is that it should be embedded in the culture. When something is offensive, verbally, all of us can play a role. Stop it there and says, it's not funny. It is offensive. When it's sexual harassment, be more cognizant. Watch out for your colleagues. That touch. And I'm not trying to tell you to be so woke. It's like you can't even compliment when a woman looks good or anything like that. But I think we need to help to support and secure the safe place because there is a responsibility that comes from the workplace. I do believe, above all, women are afraid of the ramifications. And in our culture, there is a role of how loud should a woman scream? How often should a woman talk? So I think there are cultural elements. We live in the multi-ethnic societies, and then we have the urban areas, the rural areas. All this form very big touch points, how will impact. But I believe that this offensive bullying happens a lot more. And I think that's why it's so sticky,
And I totally agree. I mean, culturally, there's so many topics in the country which are so taboo, and it's so difficult to bring up because there is that, I would say either that mental barrier or, if I take a step back and really look at it, I think also people don't really know how to approach the topic because it's never been normalized. It's never been socialized. Nobody has ever, kind of...
it's taboo to talk about.
Exactly,
Yes.
it is, yes.
Yeah.
I give you another example. I mean, I've been working on this policy for a while at L'Oreal regarding domestic violence, right? And how do we support people who have gone through it, both men and women, on the kind of support that would be required. Now, I remember speaking at one conference, I think Ollie was there as well, and, they were also asking of, okay, what do companies do? What are some new initiatives? And I remember, just testing the water with the audience to see, because, yes, we talk about other policies, flex care leave, making sure that, people have time to look after family, work from home policies and all that. Okay, fine, nothing new that they've heard of. And then I said, but, what about topics that we are not talking about? And I mentioned domestic violence. And immediately you could hear the room went quiet. I think nobody just knew what to do with it. And there was, I felt that, the tension was quite palpable. I mean, and it gave me that realization that, yes, it's still a very difficult topic to break through because, like you said, it's taboo. There is still a lot of stigma related to it. I think people don't really, haven't gone through a detailed understanding of how is that, what does that look like in Malaysia? Who's really, at the end of it? And how do we support people who go through it?
Right. I think to kind of look at that issue under a societal lens here in Malaysia, it's because what we see publicly is when we hear about domestic violence and we hear about sexual violence here in public, the people who are the perpetrators of that, the punishment that they get is often not strong enough. And it's kind of just, well, this thing happens anyway,
Yes.
And it's not, those people are not punished enough.
Absolutely. And Richard, in like some of the industries, they say, oh, interactions are so common. You can't expect it. This is an industry where, men and women mingle so loosely and, this is the joke. And I'm saying, no, that's not acceptable because you are normalizing, you're saying, because this is in the, like, for example, hospitality industry, right? It doesn't mean it's right to have sexual harassment via verbal. It's still not acceptable, regardless of industry. I know sometimes conduct and conversations differ, but I don't think tolerance should come and you should get away because it's the industry. And I think what is very unfortunate is that, when it gets escalated and then they ask, oh, what's the proof? So it's not just the victim that has to have the courage. It's the colleagues, it's the ecosystem the person is there. Who will be courageous enough to say, I actually heard him or her abusing, so then it creates what is, you tolerate a toxic behavior and culture.
Yeah, because otherwise it creates divisions within
Absolutely,
that workplace.
Yeah, exactly. But some industries it's been more prevalent, but that doesn't mean that we should accept it. That should not be the starting benchmark, I would say.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. Now, there's growing advocacy to align workplace well-being with ISO 45003 and Malaysia's updated O-Psych Act. Now, are there real examples, perhaps, from L'Oreal or companies you've observed that show how aligning with these frameworks actually drives impact?
So I took inspiration from a session that we had the other day at the L'Oreal office, and Hetal was there, Ollie was there. We had a few, I would say, wave makers as part of the Wellness at Work Index, and I think it was Celcom DG that had actually strongly implemented it, and I got inspiration by the kind of journey, because to begin with it's still early days, I would say, right, in terms of how do we adopt it, how do we push for it, and making sure that you have the leadership team, the ones who are really driving the culture and making the change, aligned and supporting this kind of initiative. And I think that's really where the start of it is, even before we go into, okay, so what exactly does the policy mean? What exactly does it mean to implement it? But yeah, Ollie, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more, because it's closer to home for you on the policies. But it's I would say the starting point really is getting not only the awareness, getting the people who are driving the decisions and who are really leading the culture behind it, And then we look at, okay, look, how do we implement it within the company? What areas should we be tackling? Because it's not going to be the same one-size-fits-all for every company. It has to be pragmatic at the same time. Now, what are the key pertinent issues for us? But yeah, Oli, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Absolutely. Shazli, I was very impressed when I was still in that organization. So the lady running this was from the OSH segment. I mean, it is part of people, but when you drive it, and at that time it already became it was an imperative. They also had the merger at that time. They were looking at the culture. They all had a great opportunity that as you're doing the culture reset, was putting the values of respecting women. So, and what I really admire about Sue Ann was that she had a strategic plan. She was able to convince her direct leadership and beyond. And I believe it was also supported not just via the HR, but it also falls within the sustainability framework. And Richard, when you look at this actually, and I always say that, ladies and gentlemen, look at this from the three perspectives if you're in HR. Yes, it is part of the employee value proposition. But if you look from a risk management, where people risks are one of the highest risks today, and burnout is the highest, one of the highest, so you're talking to your chief risk officer as well. The other part is you're talking to your chief sustainability officer too, because, they're all doing reporting. If you're public listed, there are reporting metrics. Not that I'm saying metrics should be it, but, you bring the whole entire organizational objective by one action. So I think that's where you can get collective leadership support, because it's not just an HR problem. It really is a business imperative. Okay.
And what I think was good about the policy is it gives now a consistent framework for companies to work on. I take example like at L'Oreal, we had long had kind of already a framework regarding this. We call it the share and care policy, and it surrounds things like protection, health, balance at the workplace, and how do we make sure that all of this is all-encompassing, I would say, for the employees. But now with this, why I say it's a great initiative, because now we have to see how do we marry the two on top of an existing framework that we've already had. But at the same time, it's great in terms of elevating that topic and making sure that all companies can come to kind of a consistent base and make it a lot more, I would say, for employees that aspiration now to join companies, that feeling of safety wherever I go is going to be much better taken care of.
Okay. We've got time for one last question, and it's going to be a quick one. But if each of you could offer one practical, no BS action that organizations will say no fluff action, to be fair, that they can take right now, today, immediately, to improve workplace well-being for women, what would it be?
Do the index so you can have a focused intervention, because then you can measure the right things.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing, which is coming back to the topic about measuring it. Don't go for 10 policies, go for 2 or 3, measure it, let it take its time, to I would say, really sink into the culture, make it a kind of a change. But again, if you're not going to measure it, it's not going to move.
Brilliant. Oli, Shazli, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Folks, I was speaking with Nurlida Azmi, Oli, the chapter lead for People Community for the Wellbeing at Work movement and founder of Chapter Advisory, and Shazli Ghani, HR Director for L'Oreal Malaysia and Singapore. If you've missed any part of this conversation, you can catch the podcast on our website at bfm.my or download the BFM app. You can also find our shows on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts and other podcast players. Just search for The Workplace. It's me, Rich Bradbury. Keep it here on BFM 89.9, the business station.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.